The afternoon sun hung heavy over the cul-de-sac, painting the rows of identical houses in a golden glare. Children's bicycles leaned against fences. Sprinklers whispered across neat lawns. And yet the scene was anything but peaceful. At the center of the street, she stood, her arms crossed tight, lips curled in disdain. The woman had a reputation. The neighbors whispered her name like a warning. Karen. To her, every misplaced trash can, every parked car, every patch of grass was an opportunity to assert control. And today she had found her target. The man stood tall but silent, his presence calm, almost too calm. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, broad shoulders squared, eyes steady. His skin glistened faintly from the heat, but his expression did not flinch beneath her insults. People like you don't belong here, she sneered, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of cicadas. A few neighbors shifted uneasily on their porches, glancing toward each other, debating whether to step forward, but none did. Then, in a moment that would etch itself into every witness's memory, she spat. The act was swift, deliberate, dripping with both disrespect and venom. Gasps rippled down the street, but the man did not move. He did not shout back. He did not even wipe his face. He stood still, a statue of composure against the storm of her hatred. The silence was deafening. Even the sprinklers seemed to pause. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that the man she had just tried to humiliate was not a guest, not a stranger, and certainly not someone she could control. He was about to become the one voice in this neighborhood that mattered more than hers. He was the newly elected president of the HOA, chosen quietly, overwhelmingly, by the very neighbors who had grown tired of her rule. And as she smirked, believing she had won yet another small battle of dominance, her downfall had already begun. Because dignity has a way of standing taller than cruelty, and silence, when carried by true strength, speaks louder than any insult hurled in anger. The man remained still, his silence a weight that pressed on everyone watching. There was something about him, something in the way he stood, the way his gaze did not waver. That stirred a question in the hearts of those who watched. Who was he? He wore no suit, no badge of authority, only a plain shirt tucked neatly into worn jeans. His hands, though, told a different story. Scarred knuckles, veins like cords, the steady stillness of someone trained to endure storms most could not imagine. When he shifted his weight, the subtle limp in his left leg became clear. To some, it might look like weakness. To others, it was a mark of survival. Karen saw none of this. To her, he was nothing more than an obstacle, another man who dared to stand where she thought she reigned. She believed her voice was law, her rules unbreakable. She believed silence meant defeat. But silence has many languages. Sometimes it is surrender. Sometimes it is strength. And in this case, it was a quiet storm, waiting. The neighbors watched with a blend of guilt and awe. They had lived under her shadow for years, each confrontation grinding down their courage, each letter slipped into their mailboxes, a reminder that her approval was the price of peace. They had wanted change, but no one had dared to speak. Yet here he stood, saying nothing, enduring everything, while her venom spilled into the open air. His silence was not submission, it was a mirror. It showed them their own fear, their own silence, and made them question why they had let one woman hold so much power for so long. The man's presence raised questions that burned hotter than the sun that day. Why was he here? What story was hidden in those steady eyes? And why, when most would have broken under such humiliation, did he remain so unshakably calm? The answer lay in a past far away from these polished driveways and trimmed lawns, a past carved in deserts, in sacrifice, in silence, and in loss. Years before this moment, before the cul-de-sac, before the HOA meetings and neighborhood squabbles, the man's life had been shaped by a very different kind of battle. His name was Marcus. He had worn a uniform once, not of pressed cotton, but of combat fabric, heavy with sand, sweat, and duty. The sound of cicadas that filled this street was nothing compared to the roar of helicopters the crack of distant fire, the silence that followed after a comrade's last breath. He had walked through foreign towns where the air smelled of dust and burning fuel, where every shadow could hide danger. He had carried brothers on his back, feeling their blood seep through his uniform, their last words seared into his heart. He had seen young men leave home with bright eyes and return in silence, their stories cut short. And yet through all of it, Marcus had endured. He had come home with medals he never displayed, with scars he never explained, and with a limp that reminded him daily of the price of survival. But his greatest burden was not his wounds. It was the memory of those who never made it back. To his neighbors, he was just a man moving into a quiet community. They saw the boxes stacked in his garage, the careful way he tended to his lawn, the polite nods he gave when walking past. Few knew the depth of sacrifice that shadowed his steps. And fewer still understood the vow he carried inside him, that no one under his watch would ever be bullied into silence again. Marcus had lost too many voices to accept that kind of cruelty at home. He had faced too much darkness to allow, arrogance to reign in a place meant for peace. So when he stood before Karen, steady and unmoving, he was not just enduring her disrespect. He was protecting something larger than himself. He was honoring the memory of those who had taught him that dignity outlives fear, and that true strength is measured not by words, but by restraint. And soon this neighborhood would discover just how much strength silence could hold. The street held its breath. Karen's insults hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Neighbors shifted behind half-closed blinds, their silence a familiar companion. This was how it always went. She lashed out, others looked away, and nothing changed. But this time something was different. Marcus remained still, his silence no longer just a shield. It was a challenge. Every second he refused to bend, her fury grew sharper. She stepped closer, jabbing her finger at his chest, spitting words about rules, violations, and power. Yet the more she raged, the smaller she seemed beside his unshakable calm. A boy across the street tugged at his mother's hand. "Why doesn't he say anything?" he whispered. The mother swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "silence is the loudest answer." Then came the moment no one expected. A car pulled up, and out stepped two board members carrying a thick folder. Their voices cut through the tension, announcing what Karen had never imagined. "We're here to welcome our new HOA president, Marcus Williams." The words struck like thunder. The neighbors gasped, some covering their mouths, others exchanging looks of relief. Karen froze, color draining from her face. She stammered, searching for control, but it was gone. The very man she had spat on now held the authority she believed was hers. Marcus finally moved. He wiped his face, slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, in a voice steady and calm, he spoke his first words of the day. "Respect is not demanded, it is earned." The silence that followed was heavier than her insults. For the first time, the neighbors stepped forward, not to side with her, but to stand beside him. One by one, doors opened, people emerged, and the street filled with quiet solidarity. A community, long divided by fear, was finally united by dignity. Karen's voice trembled as she tried to argue, but it no longer mattered. Her reign had ended, not through shouting, not through revenge, but through the power of honor. Marcus turned, looking over the crowd, his words now a promise. "Strength is not how loud you speak. It's how long you can stand without breaking." It was a line that would echo long after that day, repeated at kitchen tables and whispered at future meetings. His silence had spoken louder than her fury, and his dignity had transformed an entire neighborhood. As the sun dipped low, neighbors who had once stayed hidden lingered outside, talking, smiling, finding courage again. Karen retreated behind her door, her power broken, her voice forgotten. And Marcus, with quiet steps, walked home, not as a victim, not even as a victor, but as a man who had reminded them all of something timeless, that true leadership is not about control, but about respect.